Yo, what up, people? Now listen, today I'm making a little bit different of a video, okay? Today I'm participating in the ridiculing and takedown of a fellow teacher. Now usually my goal is to support teachers all the time, every day, right? Specifically because of the mistreatment, disrespect, and abuses they endure daily. It's just like an incredibly difficult job, okay? But every once in a while, there's a teacher so phony, so full of misconduct and misinformation that it is my duty to expose them. That teacher is known as Professor Jiang of the YouTube channel Predictive History. Maybe you've heard of him, but also maybe not, okay? If not, consider yourself lucky, right? Just close this video, keep walking the earth, and just live a better life. Chances are, though, you might have heard of him. You might have seen his videos on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, okay? He's recently just amassed over 1 million followers on his main YouTube channel, and he has thousands and thousands of followers on his secondary and supporting channels. In general, I think he's really sort of garnered and collected a very cult-like following. If you read any of the comments on his YouTube videos, they're full of what the kids call glazing. Professor Jiang appears to be this smart, sort of edgy teacher and proudly proclaims that he is giving you the real education, the real inside scoop in society, and that his lessons will even make you a better person. Many of his lessons are so filled with top secret, wild information that some words he can't even say because he might get censored or something.
Today, we are going to discuss some extremely controversial topics. And because this is going to go on YouTube, there are certain words I cannot say.
In his videos, he stands in front of his electronic whiteboard, frantically scribbling notes in his little chicken scratch handwriting, okay? He presents content all in front of an actual classroom. Whoa, bro. And the students get to even ask questions at the end. What? And just to be clear, from my understanding, this is all in front of a high school class. He's not even a real professor at a university. The professor title is just an incredibly misleading nickname. Ultimately, the reality is this. Professor Jiang is a horrible teacher. He lies, in my opinion. He misrepresents nearly everything, sometimes willfully, sometimes just ignorantly. He confidently spreads misinformation. He promotes magical thinking and weird ideas. He often never cites his sources or even seems to have any sources other than himself. And he even helps spread and bolster a conspiracy theory or three. My goal with this video is to organize clips and examples for why Jiang is a complete nonsense pusher and phony of a teacher. Okay? Ultimately, I hope this video reduces his popularity and at least some of his fans or followers will watch it and realize, maybe I shouldn't listen to this guy. I'm going to attempt to keep my clips short, but honestly, I could go through every single video of his and analyze it to expose some ridiculous BS he's pushing, okay? Literally, he has hours and hours of videos on YouTube, and you could select any video, watch it, and find nonsense all the time. And that's basically my main claim. Professor Jiang misrepresents nearly everything. I've broken the clips down into specific categories, and all the links will be located in my description. Thanks for watching. First things first, Jiang misrepresents reality and thinking. Jiang has this belief that all thoughts and ideas come from what's called the Geist. In his words, it's like a multi-layered, multi-dimension world that we access all the time. And he continually references the Geist for his personal beliefs on thoughts, thinking, memory, empathy, etc., etc. Earth, I guess, is like the outer shell, and ultimately our goal is to keep getting deeper and deeper into the Geist until we get to the heart of it all with what's called the monad. Or as he describes it, the spiritual force that caused the Big Bang. Again, I don't know. What is he talking about? Let's check out an example.
The answer is the Geist, right? The answer is, where do our thoughts come from? And where do our thoughts go? Do you really think that it's our brain that produces thoughts? Why is it that with the same brain, right? Same neurological structure, but we have different ideas? And why is it that I have so many ideas and others have limited ideas? Well, like biologically, we cannot explain it, okay? We've never explained it. So if you study neuroscience, one thing that they will never ever ask is, where do our thoughts come from? Which is weird because that should be the most basic question, right? That's the first question you ask, but they never ask that. Why? Because they cannot answer it. And the answer, the possibility is the Geist exists, and our ideas come from the Geist. And when we think of ideas, it goes back into the Geist, right? It's a ghost. It is with us and it is not with us.
This is obviously ridiculous. Neuroscientists, of course, think about and discuss where our thoughts come from, okay? Very obviously, though, there's zero scientific evidence for his weird views about the Geist and that our thoughts come from outside of our brain, okay? What? Jiang furthers this weird sort of magical thinking throughout many of his videos as he references a sense of empathy that people feel that connect each other telepathically. He often presents his own special pseudoscientific version of synchronicity and describes it like this.
Let's just say you're a mother and you have children, okay? And one of them goes off to France on vacation. But then while he's in France, he gets hit by a car and he's hospitalized. Would you as a mother know that your son is in danger? Would you feel it? He hasn't called you, you don't know about this, but in your heart, would you know it? The answer is yes, you would know it. You would feel something is wrong. You would get on the phone and try to call your son. You can't reach your son, you would call the police, okay? You don't know what's happening, but something in your heart is telling you, I need to get in touch with my son. Okay, and that's how the hive mind works. That's how synchronicity works.
And here's another clip of him sort of freestyling on this topic.
Empathy just means our connections with others, okay? And this is something we're born with. So a mother is born with an emotional connection with a child, right? And a child has an emotional connection with the mother. And over time, as this connection grows, their empathy develops. And this empathy almost becomes telepathic, so that even if the child is in school and the child is bullied, the mother is washing her clothes. She's like, I don't feel right. Maybe I should call the teacher and ask how my child is doing, okay?
And then again, here's a clip of Jiang sort of explaining where he gets his own ideas from.
Let me give you another example. I write books, and I've written 3 novels. And you won't believe this, okay? But my wife is here, and like she knows how I work. You would think that when you write a book, you would spend every day at the desk and read books, take notes, and then transform it into a book, right? I don't do that. What I do is I lie in bed and I might play some video games or I might read a book, okay? I get up, I walk to the park, and I come back and I have all these ideas. And I write down all these ideas over 1 hour, 2 hours on the computer, okay? And then I'm exhausted. I've run out of ideas. And I'm like, okay, tomorrow, what am I gonna do if I have no ideas? I can't write anymore. But what happens is the next day I get up and I have new ideas. And I write it back and I write it down again, okay? So it's not like I am generating these ideas, it's more like I'm receiving these ideas. If you actually watch me work, it is almost impossible to think that I actually do any work because I'm always like lying around or walking around or daydreaming, okay? My wife tells me that when I write or when I work, it's like I'm possessed. I'm possessed by something, okay?
So again, let me just remind you all. Jiang is presenting these wild, weird, pseudoscientific views as if they are factual in front of a group of students as their teacher. I could probably end the video here, right? That's some weird stuff going on. Sadly though, there's more. The next section, Professor Jiang misrepresents science and the scientific method. Let's start with this clip.
Let me give you an example of this. If you look at every major scientific discovery, it all came to the person in a dream or when he was, or it sort of popped into that person's head. Okay? It's just think of a light bulb popping up, okay? No scientist in the history of humanity has ever come up with a great idea using the scientific method. I guarantee you. They've all came up with a great idea through their imagination, through their intuition, by channeling the divine. Okay, that's every single scientist, including Einstein, Newton.
Every scientific discovery came from a dream or just popped in their head. First of all, how would you even verify that? Okay? Second of all, it's not true. Scientific discoveries happen for many reasons, often long processes of people conducting experiments through trial and error. Just to pass it off as a pop in the head or a dream is, I think, pretty disrespectful. So it's basically my opinion that because Jiang has these unverifiable and just really kind of dumb and magical viewpoints about the Geist and the monad, he just naturally has a disdain for science because it proves him wrong. He often presents this disdain as he talks about the scientific method. Or, I'm sorry, as he misrepresents the scientific method.
As you're taught the scientific method. Okay, what's the scientific method? Well, you do research, you create a hypothesis from the research, and then you create an experiment to test out the hypothesis. And then you have data, and then you make observations, and then you refine the hypothesis, okay? And this is what we believe a way to model the act of thinking. And you're taught this in every class, even in English class, right? You do research, then you create an outline, right? The outline has a thesis with 3 evidence, right? And then you write it out with a draft, you edit it, and you get the process. Okay? This is what you find in school. I'm gonna say something that will shock you, okay? This is what you're taught in school. This is what you believe works. But as someone who is much older than you are, as someone who actually thinks for a living, who teaches for a living, who writes for a living, I'm gonna tell you, how you actually think is the complete opposite. Okay?
So I would just say right off the bat, I don't think the learning and the teaching of the scientific method is meant to sort of mimic or show how we think. If anything, it's supposed to teach us a better way of thinking, a better way of researching and studying and trying to get to the realities of the world we live in. Okay? We don't naturally think like this. That's why it's important to teach this method, because it's the best method to get to facts about reality.
You're taught in school, it's a process that creates the idea. What I'm telling you is that in reality, it's the idea that creates the process. Okay?
I think he's just confusing the issue because ultimately writing and the scientific method basically begins with an idea. Okay? Then we research, we refine, we study, we test that idea, and maybe come to a different or a better conclusion. Real quick though, what's funny is that later on in this lesson, a student even calls him out and says, "Isn't the hypothesis just the idea?" Which basically is correct.
Okay. Is a hypothesis the idea? Okay. No, the hypothesis is the assumption. Okay? What I'm trying to tell you is this.
Professor Jiang says, "Nope, you're wrong."
Now, I know this sounds weird, but let me give more examples. James Watson came up with the double helix model of DNA. How he did this was he spent years and years working to figure out how DNA worked. And then boom, one day he had a dream of a staircase, a double staircase. And he's like, maybe that's the model I need to use. And then he started to do more research and he discovered, hey, this works. Okay? But the question then is, how did that get into his head?
Again, he just continues to confuse the issue. What is he even talking about here? He no longer even seems to be talking about the scientific method. Instead, he goes back to his weird viewpoint that ideas just pop in people's head. Honestly, if you study this viewpoint about the helix or whatever, the discovery of DNA and all that, obviously they might have started from some random idea, but that idea is researched and confirmed through the scientific method. So I don't even know what he's talking about here. This misrepresentation of science and almost like an anger for it bleeds into other areas of scientific study, more specifically about evolution. Jiang is clearly not a fan of evolution and spends many of his videos misrepresenting evolution and the people that believe in evolution.
And you all know the theory of evolution because they teach this to you in school and is embedded in our everyday lives. And there are three main ideas to the theory of evolution.
For those of you just listening at home and not watching the clip, I just want to make sure it's clear. On the board, he has written about evolution that it's accidental, random, no God. It's materialistic, meaning no spirit. And it's emergent, meaning no mystery. So my response to this clip, I respond to the things he says, but also what's written on the board. Okay, I think that's important to make clear in some of my responses.
The first is that it was all accidental. So you have these genetic mutations, and the mutation that is best fitted to survive in the environment would win out. Okay, so it's all a random, accidental process. That's the first thing.
Animals adapting and encountering or having mutations that help them better adapt to their environment, I wouldn't describe that as just random. And just before people start calling me out, I understand that mutations are random, and it almost seems like Jiang understands that, but he seems to be describing all the processes of evolution as accidental and random, which again, just isn't the case. I just think it's a very poor and misguided way of describing evolution.
Second thing is that it is materialistic, meaning everything that you can see is all that exists. And the third thing is it is emergent, meaning that things build on top of each other. It is a bottom-up process.
Maybe I'm just nitpicking him here, but when he says materialistic means no spirit, to me that's just a weird way of framing it. Also, emergent does not necessarily mean no mystery. There's plenty of mystery and things we don't understand in evolution. Again, it just seems like a weird way to present this topic, and I think it hints at his sort of like desire for these like magical realms that exist, or he thinks exist.
Now, the theory of evolution marked a turning point in human history because before, European countries were Christian, and Christians believed that there was a divine God who created us, and as such, we were all equal before the eyes of God. Therefore, you cannot go and enslave other people. You cannot go and kill other people. Okay? And the theory of evolution destroys this conception of the universe and introduces a more materialistic one.
Okay, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about religion and Christianity a little bit later on, but right away, I think his explanation of the world under Christianity is incredibly weird, incredibly wrong. Like the idea you don't enslave people because everyone believes in God, it's simply just not true historically, or true from the Bible, Old and New Testament. And just real quick, the other thing I wanted to say was that many people who believe in religion and Christianity also believe in evolution, okay? They can coexist. Just evolution does not completely destroy the entire God concept, all right? For example, you can just believe God started the little speck of life on planet Earth and essentially planned out and determined that evolution would happen. Anyways, this is when his explanation of evolution gets a little dark, I think.
So why did this happen? Well, it happened for three reasons. The main reason is that we live in the 19th century when Darwinism came into being. Europeans were engaged in a process of imperialism. They were going around the world and conquering other people and colonizing other people and essentially committing genocide. So they needed a theory to explain why this was happening. And Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest was the most appropriate theory. And the idea is that the world is divided into races, and the white race is superior to everyone else, and therefore the white race has reason, has legitimacy in colonizing other people.
Oh my God. What? So very clearly, I think you can see how he's misrepresenting and really trying to poison the well of evolution. To act like evolution gave rise to racism and eugenics is wild, and that people weren't committing imperialism or mass genocide or colonialism until they found evolution to justify it. All of this is simply not true. In fact, before the discovery of evolution, people were committing mass genocide, imperialism, colonialism, slavery, racism, eugenics, and many times they did this using religion, using the Bible, using sort of the divinity of their superiority.
And evolution would give rise to racism and eugenics, okay? So before Darwinism, we didn't really have a concept of race because everyone was equal in the eyes of God. And now with the rise of Darwinism, the world is divided according to race. As well, because of evolution theory, people started to believe in eugenics, which is the idea that stupid people who are not white, they should be sterilized. Because if we let them live, all they would do is dilute the genetic pool, okay? And even today, guys, there are still many people who believe in racism and eugenics. The thing about evolution that's
I would even say like race is not even a part of Darwinism, okay, or evolution. So to act like it is, I think is incredibly misleading. But also I think to act like we didn't have this concept of race until evolution or Darwinism, I think is ridiculous. Just read the Bible. There are clearly different ideas of race and different groups of people. Some people you can enslave, some people you couldn't. So again, I just think Jiang is really misrepresenting evolution and science in his presentation. Again, in front of a group of students that are trying to learn and become educated from this person.
the question I want to leave with you today is Marxism, liberalism, individualism, Darwinism, psychology, just psyops meant to turn us into slaves?
In many other clips, he really misrepresents evolution and misrepresents our minds and human beings. Here's just a few more clips to kind of show you what I'm talking about.
In theory, evolution does work, and it works for most animals, except when it comes to human beings. Okay? Because the idea of evolution is gradual progress. But we don't know how we went from the ape, okay, to the human. Second problem is humans have been around for about 200,000 years, okay? That's a long, long time. We only have maybe 50,000 years of history. So where do the other 100,000, 150,000 years go? We don't know. The third problem is, according to evolution, there should be many different types of human beings. But in fact, there's only one, Homo sapiens. Now what scientists will tell you is, well, before there were different species, the Neanderthal, the Cro-Magnon, and then gradually Homo sapiens took them over. And you can believe that, but it's problematic because according to evolution, there should be many, many different types of humans, okay? Maybe some with 6 fingers, some with 3 eyes, like animals.
Just want to plant a flag here and make it clear that all of these questions and concerns that Jiang raises are explained and accounted for from scientists and professionals in the field of evolution. Okay, you should research these. I would encourage you, Google these topics, and there are some very clear answers about why these things are happening or why there's these gaps in information. Also, I just want to say Jiang is essentially committing the God of the gaps fallacy. He's taking, interesting topics and concerns or questions or gaps in knowledge in evolution, and he's essentially using those to raise questions and start to maybe fill in his own ideas that there's a lot we don't know. So maybe there's this mystical, magical world we don't understand or know about. It's pretty weak, I would say, and this is done all the time by people who really aren't taking the time to research the topic.
Okay, last myth. We evolved from apes. And the truth is that we are imaginative and we can choose our own evolution. Okay? So you're taught in school about the theory of evolution, how we evolved from apes. And maybe our bodies evolved from apes, but our minds did not. Our minds come from somewhere else, okay?
Jiang says we're taught evolution in schools because it helps perpetuate the hierarchy.
So why are you taught we evolved from apes? It's to justify the power hierarchy, okay? Right? The people in charge are just stronger and better and more fit than we are.
No, we're taught evolution in schools because it is based in fact, and every single area of science agrees with the theory of evolution and corroborates it. Many of these points that Jiang presents about evolution sound exactly like anti-science talking points from Christians or Christian leaders. And so this brings us into our next topic, is that Jiang misrepresents religion and Christianity. Now, as you can see, I think Jiang has his own magical beliefs about the world we live in. And he often describes his own religion as Gnosticism, which the definition is here on the board. Gnosticism is an ancient, diverse religious and philosophical movement that centered on attaining gnosis, secret, esoteric knowledge of the divine. But I think it's incredibly clear that Jiang, throughout many of his videos, has a deep love and care for Christianity and also Jesus himself. In all honesty, I think Jiang spent most of his life as like a deep believer and lover of Jesus and Christianity, and then slowly, slightly changed his viewpoint to be more of like a scientific version or like a pseudo-scientific version of Gnosticism, as maybe he learned and read more about the world we live in. As I'm going to show you, not only does he heavily present and support Christian viewpoints and viewpoints of Jesus, but he also heavily demonizes Judaism and Catholicism. He also has his students sort of learn to agree with his own religious viewpoints, as he literally has them read scripture from the board. These are passages that he has cherry-picked to present his very narrow viewpoints about religion. And just in general, he always seems to frame Christianity and Jesus in the most positive of lights, as you kind of saw before.
European countries were Christian, and Christians believed that there was a divine God who created us, and as such, we were all equal before the eyes of God. Therefore, you cannot go and enslave other people. You cannot go and kill other people.
Let's look at some clips.
Incarnate.
Okay, incarnate just means human, okay? So this is why Jesus had to kill himself. All right, so the problem is that God has to forgive us. But he has to forgive us in a way that allows us to learn from our mistakes and be better people, okay? And so let's use an analogy. The analogy is this. I'm a father, and I have a daughter named Eve, and I have a dog. And I say to Eve, I love you, Eve, so much. And then Eve says to me, do you love me or do you love the dog more? I said, I love you both equally. Love is infinite. Of course I love you, but I also love the dog. And Eve goes away and says to herself, yeah, but how do I know he truly loves me? So what Eve does is she kills the dog, okay? And then Eve says to me, hey, do you love me or do you love the dog more? And now I'm kind of stuck, the father, right? Because if I punish her, that shows her I love the dog more, right? But if I don't punish her, she's gonna do this again, okay? She's gonna kill another animal. So I'm stuck. So what do? So what God decides to do is this. The only way out of this conundrum, the only way out of this paradox is if I punish myself, okay? Because I should not have said to her, I love you as much as the dog, all right? So what I do is I take a whip and I hit myself. And Eve watches this. And now Eve knows, first of all, I do love her because I'm punishing myself for her sake. And second of all, she won't do it again because she doesn't want to see me punished. And that's why Jesus had to kill himself. Do you understand? That's the logic here. Now it makes sense, right? God had to punish himself so that we would be humbled by a sacrifice. We would feel so much remorse and regret for making God die that we would never ever disobey him again. We would never ever try to become God ourselves.
Pardon my language, but what the fuck is he talking about? Seriously, all the things I just said about his views of Christianity, I think could be sort of wrapped up in that video I just showed you right there. And clearly he's trying to develop and encourage some form of logic in this incredibly stupid and ridiculous story, okay? What is he talking about? So in this next clip, he's going to talk about Jesus, but he's going to use Jesus as a way to sort of mesh or combine with his Gnosticism viewpoints and his viewpoints about the monad. Honestly, it's really challenging trying to understand what's he even talking about between videos, so just check this out.
Who is Jesus? Jesus was a messenger from the monad who reminded us that there's a divine spark in us. And how you activate the divine spark is by focusing on Jesus and repeating his words. Jesus was like Zarathustra, like Plato, like Homer, like the Yahwehs, a poet prophet. And so if you just repeated his sayings, if you repeat his poetry, then you could activate that spark within you and you could glow. Okay? And this explains why he became so popular. It also explains to us why the Romans had to kill him. Because at this time, the Roman Empire, the main currency, the main economy is based on slavery. Most people were slaves. If they were not slaves, they were poor. And here's Jesus, who's come to remind you that you don't have to be a slave. You are free to do whatever you want. There's a higher power than the Roman Empire, and it is the divine. It is the universe. And so people start to defy their masters. And they were no longer afraid of death. And this is why the Romans had to kill Jesus, because Jesus was stealing from them, right? Slaves are property. If you let slaves run away, if you free slaves, that destroys the wealth of the Romans. Remember that Jesus, when he was killed along with two thieves. He was crucified. And so Jesus was killed because he was a thief. He was stealing from the Romans. Now the question then is, okay, how do we get from Jesus to the Catholic Church?
Okay, so if I'm following it, Jesus was some sort of disciple of the monad, okay, again, unconfirmed, right? But then, let's just be very clear, okay? The Bible, the Old Testament specifically, gives direct directions for how to keep your slaves. Slavery is accepted in the Bible, okay? Jesus himself never spoke out against slavery, and let's be real, Jesus is presenting as a supporter of the Old Testament. And I also think he's misrepresenting why the Romans killed Jesus. Jesus wasn't there trying to free the slaves, okay? The Romans killed Jesus specifically out of political motivations, okay? They didn't want Jesus to, rise up and be this like kingly figure, okay? This leader of men. And so, again, I just feel like Jiang is just completely misrepresenting the history and idea of Jesus as a whole to support his own weird magical viewpoints. Now, I'm not going to show these clips, but I can just show you the titles of his videos, or you can watch them yourselves. In many of his videos, he completely slanders and tries to prove how Catholicism and Judaism are incorrect and oftentimes evil, okay? Now, I want to talk a little bit about conspiracy theories later, but he often connects modern elite control and the destruction of humanity with Catholic and Jewish leadership.
The Catholic Church will give rise to people called the Black nobility, okay? These are 13 families from Rome that still run the world today. Okay, we'll discuss this later on. All right, we'll discuss how the Catholic Church and the Black nobility work together. Something you need to understand is what allowed the Catholic Church to dominate is this alliance between the Black nobility and Jews. Guess what, guys? It still happens today, okay? And the third thing is, what allows for the system to work are the secret societies, where through rituals, these powerful people are bound together, okay? And so these three ideas, the Black nobility, the alliance between Black nobility and the Jews, and the third of secret societies, is the power structure we have today.
All this biblical history and discussion really brings us into our next topic, which is that Jiang misrepresents history and politics all the time. Jiang often presents himself as some sort of intellectual historian, one with the ability to use his masterful skills of history to predict the future. I mean, his channel with over 1 million followers is literally called Predictive History. But as I've shown you, he misrepresents the history of religion, evolution, and scientific discovery. As a whole, I would just say he seems to constantly misrepresent history to push whatever narrative he's presenting on that day. From what I can tell, Jiang does not have a degree or a background in history, but somehow he teaches some weird history-based class lesson. I don't know, I can't figure it out. Here's just a couple examples of how he misrepresents history.
This semester, we are going to analyze a question together, which is, how do societies behave? Why do we do what we do? What motivates us? What drives us? And there have been different theories as to what drives human behavior. Okay, so let's go over some theories. The first theory comes to us from religion. And the idea is that we are all driven in a war between good and evil. There's a good side to us and there is an evil side to us. There's Satan and there's God. And we are constantly in a battle in ourselves. Okay? Do we move towards Satan or do we move towards God? And that's the core of human civilization. So religion is meant to give us the strength to show us the path towards goodness. Okay? That's one theory. Another theory comes to us from biology. Okay? And the idea is sex. We want to pass on our genes forward because that's the point of our existence. If we cannot have children, we all will die. So the point of our existence is to have children and have them pass on their genes to others, okay? And for males and females, life is different because as a man, you have a penis. And all you have to do is stick your penis into a woman and you're good, okay? That's all you have to do. So you want to stick your penis in as many women as possible. And that's the point of your existence. But as a woman, your life is different because it's hard to give birth. It takes 9 months to incubate the child in your womb. And then childbirth is the most painful experience anyone will ever experience. And then the child, it'll take like 16, 18 years to raise a child to maturity. So it's a huge investment on your part. So as a female, you have to be very cautious, very careful about who you marry or you have sex with, okay? And so life is a struggle between men who want to put their penis into anything and women who want to be careful about who they marry, okay? So that's the idea of biology. Then of course you have the idea of race and culture. That the world is a struggle between these different races and cultures for dominance. And each race, each culture has their own characteristics. Okay, so maybe the yellow race, they're very clever, but they're very weak. And then the white race are brave, but kind of stupid. And the black people, like, anyway, that's another theory. I'm not saying it's correct, I'm just saying it's a theory that people believe in. Then you have economics, right? And what they believe is that we are driven by money or self-interest. We want to make as much money as possible, and that's what drives us, okay? That's pretty simple. And the last big theory is the idea of liberalism. That comes from the Enlightenment. And here, the theory is that history is a progress towards enlightenment, to rationality, to truth and to justice. So the inevitability of history, of human development, is towards paradise, towards heaven. And maybe, we go off track now and then, but inevitably, we move towards God. And this comes to us from the Enlightenment. We call this liberalism. Okay? So these are 5 theories. There are others, but these are 5 theories that show you the diversity, the variety of ideas out there. What I will do this semester is present to you another theory, which I call game theory.
First of all, out there in the world, there are theories from professionals in their fields of sociology, psychology, and history about what drives human behavior and societies. I would encourage you to Google them. They're actually really interesting. The ones Jiang presents ain't them. The theories he presents are just incredibly basic buzzwords. It's embarrassing to even call them theories. He then goes on to explain them like a 5-year-old would. Just imagine talking about the race theory and then just rambling off incredibly stupid and common racist stereotypes, which ultimately just perpetuate these stereotypes and further gives them legitimacy. Again, and again, it's just dumb. The other thing that Jiang does is he takes a slight nugget of truth, or maybe even an important idea, and he just completely fumbles it and just adds in nonsense. For example,
humans have gotten smarter over the centuries. And one thing that you will learn in this class is that's not true. Humans have always been smart, but we've expressed our intelligence in different ways. So primitive cultures, they express themselves through art. They had better memories, they were more sensitive, and they were more resilient than we are. So why are we taught that we're smarter? The answer is confirmation bias, because everyone likes to believe that we're smarter than the people who came before us, okay?
now if you research this topic, I think it's clear that primitive people were strong in these areas, but to say they were better in these areas than people today, I think is pretty misleading and just not true. Now, I actually think this is a pretty good point, that people in societies were much smarter than we like to give them credit for sometimes. For example, there are so many stupid, wild, alien conspiracy theories that are thrown around when people discuss the pyramids. It's honestly insulting to just assume people couldn't do that, couldn't build the pyramids. It must have been aliens. So at the very least, it's nice to see Jiang not fall for that conspiracy theory himself. The problem with Jiang's viewpoints, though, is when he completely doubles down on these ideas and acts like humans were smarter, were hundreds of times better, and built way better things way back in the day.
So now let me give you an example of how smart they were. So let's just say that you have a boat and you want to navigate the Pacific, okay? That's very hard to do, and you usually need a computer. Why? Because there's so much information that you need to process in order to navigate the ocean. Okay, so let's go over some of the information. All right, so these are the Polynesian people. What's amazing about them is they settled the entire Pacific. Wherever there's an island, they had a settlement. What is fascinating is how they did this, because if I were to put you in a boat in the Pacific, you'll probably die, okay? And that's true for most people.
Again, he keeps doing this and bringing up this point that if you and I were in the ocean, we would just die, while the Polynesians could just travel and be amazing all over the ocean. The reality is, though, there were Polynesians you could put in the ocean and they would just die, okay? It was out of necessity and profession that many of these Polynesians, these sailors essentially, these explorers, could do the thing they could do because they adapted. It was their trade, it was their skill, and they were good at it. I mean, you could make the same argument and say, if you put a Polynesian in the desert, they would die. If you put a Polynesian on a mountainside, they would die. If you put a Polynesian in a grocery store in front of a computer, having to code for a project, they would die. I mean, like, you can put them in any scenario and make them out to be worse. Also, if you research the Polynesians, they damaged their own society through a lot of, I would say, just like through methods they didn't understand or know about. They caused heavy deforestation, okay? They had unsustainable population growth, soil exhaustion, and they killed a lot of their birds. So literally, their destructive nature in areas they weren't educated on led to their downfall, led to the decreasing of their society. I mean, they literally couldn't even have trees to build canoes to travel. Anyways, not trying to throw shade at ancient Polynesians, but I just want to show how Jiang tends to cherry pick data to push a certain historic narrative that he's trying to present on that day. He further doubles down on this topic when a student actually calls him out. And I think this interaction is very telling about the type of person Jiang is.
This is one of the most, yes? Yeah, go ahead.
You said that the previous people are like smarter than today's because they can navigate the Pacific like just with the boat and don't sleep. But nowadays we use computer, right? But I think that nowadays we use computer is not because that we cannot navigate the ocean just by a boat and human. Is because this matter is we could get more precise and accurate information.
Okay, that's not true, okay? If I put you on a ceiling computer, you would die. It's that simple, okay? The computer's not gonna help you navigate the ocean, okay? All right.
This kid is a legend, okay? He comes back again to challenge Jiang's idiotic viewpoints, and Jiang, again, shuts him down. It's just kind of sad, kind of dumb. Very funny, though.
All right, any more questions? Yep.
So I do agree that we cannot build pyramids nowadays, and I will definitely die if you just put me on a pathetic. But but like for more modern people, we also can do like a lot of things that previous people cannot. So how does the building of a pyramid, these things demonstrate that the previous people are
Can you
smart?
tell me what we do today that is so wonderful and spectacular?
What?
Yeah, what do we do today that's so wonderful and spectacular, and you think it's amazing?
What?
Give an example of something that we do today
Oh.
that is spectacular and wonderful. Okay, yeah. I mean, do you have an example?
Okay.
Okay, thank you, okay? Yeah. So give me an example.
So keep that in mind, kids. There's nothing wonderful or spectacular that we can or have done today. Remember that, all right? Now, I'm no historian myself, okay? But many of these topics, when I hear them, I think something's not right here, okay? I just already know these are not correct. And a simple Google search will simply prove me right.
Actually, if you look at most ancient societies, the most natural organization is that women are usually in control.
Okay, let's just do a Google search. In most ancient societies, were women in control? Answer is, in most ancient societies, women were not in control, as the majority of civilizations were patriarchal.
Why? Because women have complete autonomy over their bodies. So they can choose who to have sex with. And that's where the power comes from. They control access to sex, which gives men pleasure.
Okay, let's Google this again. Did women have complete autonomy over their bodies in ancient societies? Answer is no. Women generally did not have complete autonomy over their bodies in ancient societies. Most civilizations were strictly patriarchal.
With this power, they often choose to sleep with as many men as possible. Okay? And there are three reasons why they choose this strategy. The first is it's fun, okay? It gives them pleasure to have sex with as many men as possible. That's number one. Number two is women are really good at negotiating politics, and they use sex as a political strategy. So if two guys are fighting each other, she has sex with both, and then voila, they're best friends now, okay?
Oh, right. Yep. That totally makes sense, actually. You know what? I didn't even think of that. You know, that seems to line up perfectly with reality. Yep, totally.
Number three is the most important. If you're a woman, you want to make sure that all your children grow up successfully. They don't die, okay? And they're happy and they're healthy. So from your perspective, it's your advantage to hide paternity, to hide the fact who the father is. Why? Because now all the men in the village, in the community, are responsible for raising a child. Because no one knows who the real father is, so everyone assumes that I could be the father, okay?
Now, this explanation automatically sounds made up and fake because it really doesn't match to today's world. But if you do research this topic about ancient societies, there were some that practiced paritable paternity with multiple fathers, polyandry, and paternity as like a social construct. But I think the way Jiang describes it and explains it is just really without any specific information. It would be interesting to tell us which type of this practice was associated with what specific ancient civilization. Also, I just want to say too, in all these examples, women didn't just hide paternity. Instead, it seems like it was a more agreed upon social norm that existed. So there was no sort of misinformation or deviousness from women in hiding paternity.
And this is historically how societies are usually organized.
I would again encourage you all to research this topic. From my research, it seems like this statement he has just said is incredibly false.
The moment you give women choice, they choose to improve their lives by marrying someone better. Okay? Not all, but most. And so over time, what happens is your society collapses. If you look at history, the best indicator that a society is about to collapse is if the women who are wealthy and well educated, if they refuse to have children.
Again, another crazy statement, so let's research it. What are the best indicators for if a society is about to collapse in history? The results don't even mention what Jiang has told us. Even in the explanations of the main reasons, there's no mention of women just deciding not to have children or wealthy, educated women deciding not to have children. So it's just a really weird, I don't know if it's a lie or piece of misinformation that Jiang is providing. Yeah, just kind of strange.
This is what happened to the Romans who collapsed. This is what happened to many empires.
In researching the Roman Empire and why it collapsed, or even any indicators why it collapsed, there's not even a hint of a whisper related to wealthy, educated women choosing not to have children. So honestly, I would love a source from Jiang on this. I have no idea where he gets this. Also, it's extremely funny that he just quickly says, "in other empires," and then moves on. So I don't know. I just don't trust him on this at all. In these recent videos I've shown you, Jiang really spends a lot of time diving into game theory. He actually talks about game theory a lot in most of his content. You often get the sense that Jiang sees himself as some sort of leading professional or genius in the world when it comes to game theory. He holds it in extremely high reverence, and he even tells his students that learning game theory will make you a better person, which I maybe agree with. But much like with everything else, Jiang often misapplies and misrepresents game theory. The way I would describe game theory is that it's essentially a tool. By applying game theory to certain situations, we can play around with different outcomes and options that players or people in these games might have. Game theory might give us better insight into different strategies people can take in any given situation, especially in politics. But like any tool, it's only as good as its user. At the end of the day, if your worldview is broken or your brain is just scrambled eggs, you can completely misuse game theory and fail at correctly identifying any major points or strategies. And as I've shown you, Jiang's worldview and areas of knowledge seem completely broken. Because of this, his use of game theory often turns situations or games into incredibly convoluted and random sounding encounters. Simply put, his use of game theory never really seems to match reality. This is actually one of my favorite videos that Jiang has done. It's called Game Theory Number 2, Why Schools Suck. And it's so hilarious because towards the beginning, and again, remember, this is in front of a class, Jiang spends a lot of time explaining how amazing, how innovative he was as a school leader, all the things he implemented. Students were ultra successful, went on to amazing colleges. Then he reveals that he was ultimately fired. Nobody liked him, and he could not get a job. He was essentially blacklisted, okay? it just sounds like the wildest whining and crying a teacher or educator could do in front of their class. It just is wild. Also, I just want to say I would love to be able to fact check him on some of his claims. He makes some wild claims in this that just feel dishonest.
Okay, so I set up two new activities. The first is called the coffee house. And the coffee house is the first coffee house in China, in the Chinese high school. There are lots of coffee houses today, but I was the first person to set up a coffee house. The other thing I did was something called the daily newspaper. And this was the first daily newspaper in China in a high school, and probably maybe even around the world, where students every day had to report, collect information, write articles, edit it, and publish it. And they worked until like midnight, sometimes until 2 a.m. And so this system, in a very short amount of time, even though there were a lot of problems in the beginning, it became a very effective system after a semester or a year. And not only that, the students who went for this program did very well in life. They went to Yale, they went to Wharton, Cornell, and this program, actually in middle school, became the most famous program in South China. And when our students had the best record of college admissions in South China, okay? So this sounds great, right? Okay, the problem is this. The problem is what happened after I established the program. The first one that happened was, okay, I was fired. They said, get out of here, okay? Second of all, the teachers, the parents, the students were all happy to see me go. They were like, get out of here. We never want to see you again. The third thing that happened was I did come to Beijing and set up a new program that was very similar to this, okay? But after that, after 4 years of doing this and being very successful at this, I was never allowed to set up another program again. When I was doing this, the word that everyone used to describe me was not reformer, not visionary, not idealist, not dreamer, but dictator. Okay? Or another word that they used that was more common was, this guy's an asshole, okay?
So now Jiang is going to attempt to use game theory to sort of lay out our school systems and all the players involved and their motivations. I think this is a great example of how Jiang uses game theory in a very subjective and warped way to present his worldview. It's essentially like a fired employee trying to review their company after he's left. It's pretty bad.
Yeah. Another thing that you have to do in game theory is you have to rank the importance of the players. Okay, so not all players are equal. So in this game theory, even though there are students, and students are the majority, students actually don't matter. Okay? What students actually think and what don't actually matter. Because teachers do this job, and for them, the priority is to do as little work as possible to get by. Okay? I'm not saying all teachers, I'm saying the majority of teachers in the school are just trying to get by. Because quite honestly, they have families. They have other responsibilities. Okay? They're not trying to build the best school possible. They're not trying to change the world. They're not trying to educate students. They're just trying to get by. Do the least amount of work in order to get by. Government is, okay, they say they want innovation, creativity, technology, but really it's just like no problems, guys. Okay? As long as you don't create any problems for us, we're happy with you. Just stay away from us. We're happy to not bother you. Please don't come bother us. Yeah, that's government. Also, what they want is for students who will also be no problems in the future, right? Right? So compliance. So as long as schools are teaching you how to obey authority, how to comply, how to do what you're told, they're happy. You're a good school. Okay?
This next game theory example is a video he does about the dating game. And again, I would encourage you all to watch this, see if you can make any sense of it at all. He has males and females. If you're rated a 5 at the top of the list, you have the best genes, wealth, and status. If you're a 1, you're obviously the worst. And he tries to come up with some convoluted explanation for how and why they should procreate. I don't know. Again, I feel like his worldview about men and women and their dating is completely warped. Hopefully this short clip gives you a good idea of what I'm talking about.
So, according to biology, what we call evolutionary biology or evolution psychology, we're always trying to find the best genes to procreate because this ensures that our genes pass on. Okay? So, remember that men have a penis, which they can stick into anything. Women have to give birth, so the strategies are different, okay? So basically, number 5 is trying to have sex with all 5 women, right? That's his strategy. No, but female number 5 wants to ensure that she only gets 5. Okay? So these are different strategies. And according to evolutionary psychology, all 5 of these females should try to procreate with number 5, okay? No, you can't do this. It's suicidal. Why is it suicidal? Because the human race couldn't survive, right? It'd be idiotic to do something like this, where all 5 women are just trying to marry this one guy, and maybe him, okay? But these 3 are eliminated. Because then your society would collapse. You couldn't have that many children. So this can't possibly be true, right?
Now listen, I'm obviously no historian. I'm no game theorist, I'm no sociologist. I'm just an English education major that teaches some high school English classes. Just like Professor Jiang, basically. But I have worked with and know many history teachers and history majors. Just to make sure I wasn't completely off the mark with Jiang, I reached out to a historian friend just to get their thoughts on Jiang and his teachings. Here is our conversation. Okay folks, hello. We have Corey with us. Corey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm Corey. I am a IT person by day, historian by night. I have a bachelor's of science in American history, and then I also have a minor in sociology that probably won't call on as much. I didn't do as much for that one. My focus is usually in American labor history, but I dabble in all sorts of old history and got a pretty broad education from my college experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. And so just as a little intro, we've done debates and discussions in the past. You know, you seem to be incredibly knowledgeable and passionate about history. And we've both kind of fallen down the rabbit hole of maybe, you know, we started watching, I think, Jiang, like what's he talking about? What's he speaking on?
Yeah.
And then I think we both fell down like the rage rabbit hole. Okay, so like, do you just want to talk about what were your sort of initial impressions of this so-called Professor Jiang?
You know, it's one of those things with he's so all over the place that like I feel like my initial reactions were mostly just like what? Like clicking on any clip of him and just being like, what is he talking about? And then just like you said, like I watched like 1 or 2 clips with my account signed in while we were having some discussions about him, and then all of a sudden like my YouTube shorts are full of like Professor Jiang clips, and I'm always getting like recommended videos from him. And yeah, he's a real wacky guy. He tries very hard to come off as like professional, but his videos are very like almost like PragerU type videos where there's like a lot of words but not a lot of context behind them. He does a lot of he likes to draw graphs that don't really have any sort of information on them at all.
Yeah.
He'll just do like a bar graph and then a line going up.
Right. And he you know, he's got the sort of teacher persona on there. Okay, he's in front of the board. He's always writing on this board. This man is
Yes.
writing, okay? And so
He was writing on the
you know,
board.
when you just watch him, you're like, okay, he's doing stuff. Um, but ultimately, you know, I'm not as knowledgeable or really knowledgeable at all, you know, I guess in history type stuff. And when I hear Professor Jiang talk about history compared to other things maybe I do know about that he talks about, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if this man is being honest. And, you know, just to be upfront, it seems as if he does not have a degree or a background in history, which is fine. Like, I'm not saying people
Yeah.
who don't have a degree in history can't talk about history, okay? But I do just think that maybe it's some important information, and his channel is called Predictive History. So I just am curious, like, from a historian's perspective, how do you think, I would just say, like, what are your problems with the history that he does present?
Yeah, I think that with the histories that he does present, which like you said, like his channel is called Predictive History. The main series that he's been doing for the last couple months is called Secret History, where he's kind of like branding it as like history they don't want to teach you. Um, but I would say that like in the most like charitable, graceful light, I'd say that he's very intellectually lazy or like limited in his historical knowledge beyond like a lot of pop culture, kind of like history platitudes. Um, and I would say like in the least charitable light, he's just straight up a liar and doesn't know what he's talking about. And
Yeah.
just, I mean, to be honest, just straight up says things that are just not reality. Um, in ways that like anything from just like kind of fighting against the idea of evolution or saying that like the Roman Empire collapsed because women could choose their partners and could wealthy women who were educated didn't want to have kids. um and so like he speaks in a lot of very vague generalities about history that I feel like in a lot of the other ways that he talks, like he'll say things that are like, oh, that's kind of true, and then he'll follow it up with something crazy. But like honestly, a lot of times when he talks about history, just like from the beginning, I'm just like, that you just made that up.
So you can tell.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like he kind of gives off the vibe of like what a dumb person thinks a smart person sounds like
Okay. Yeah.
when it comes to history. Like just for example, like when he talks about the when he's talking about the Roman Empire collapsing, he's like, the one of the main reasons the empire collapsed because wealthy, educated women were choosing not to have kids. And then he goes on and he's like, this happened in a lot of societies. He's like, in the way that he describes it, he just goes, it happened in the Roman Empire and many others. And then he just moves on. He doesn't provide any examples of the other societies that collapsed because women had the right to choose an education over having kids. Um, he doesn't go into specifics on anything, and then he just kind of brushes past it and uses that to like frame the argument of the rest of his video, but he hasn't actually provided any evidence or sources for his initial claim.
Now, and this is what I want to bring up too. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. One of my problems with him too, and this comes from me like doubting him, he often does not present any sources. He'll just
Yeah.
and I'm curious, like, at what point should you and should you not maybe present sources? Like what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, you're having a conversation with your friends, you're on like a very casual podcast and like we're talking about something, I'm not gonna like pull out like a historical journal like JSTOR article for every single thing that I say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but I
JSTOR.
think like,
JSTOR, that brings back memories.
oh yeah. But I think that like when it's different when you are in front of a group of teenagers and you're like responsible for teaching them about the world and you're put in this position of authority of education over them. Like you have an obligation to, it's not just about providing them accurate information, but teaching them how to find accurate information and making sure that from the beginning you're doing that and that you're modeling that. Because if you're just doing an entire class where you're just going off vibes and like things that you read and that you don't ever have any sources for, like you're not teaching your students how to think critically or how to find information for themselves. You're just teaching them to listen to what he's saying and then move on.
You know, honestly, that's an amazing point. I think again, as like when you get to the role of an educator, not only should you be teaching the history, but how to find history, how to like discover it for yourself, how to trust a source, you know? And he doesn't seem to be doing any of that.
No, and I would say like from my experience as a history student, like almost more than a teacher standing in front of the class and telling you about things that happened in the past, like the majority of what you're doing is learning how to find information, how to determine what's good information and bad information, how to write about it, and how to source it in ways that other people can also find this information and do their own research. Um, and so for me, that's kind of like if I'm looking for someone who I would consider a good historian, that's going to be like the baseline.
Hmm.
Like if they're going to like teach somebody about something, they're going to have like at least some sort of list of resources where you can look this up further or have some sort of like specific thing to tell you and not just like be like, oh, the Roman Empire and many others,
Right, right.
a lot of them.
Yeah. Now, I kind of, I want to kind of put you on the spot if that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any historians or people or like, what do you recommend when you want, like, a person wants to learn about really cool, interesting history? What do you recommend they
Yeah.
should do?
I think if you're just, casually wanting to learn about history, I don't think you should use it for an academic paper, but generally, like Wikipedia is genuinely a great place to start when you're trying to learn about a topic. It's generally a great way to get like a broad overview of a subject, and then uh, go to the bottom and find all the sources that they use, and then
Yep.
look those up. You could also do things like you could look up a lot of professors post their lectures on YouTube if you know how to search for them. And they'll usually have really good information and recommended reading materials at the end of the class. I think finding any sort of group or society that's historically focused that you feel like you can trust, or even just going to your local library. Like I live right down the street from the Tennessee State Museum, and you can just walk through there and come out with like a whole list of different things to look up and resources to read through.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think libraries are such an amazing resource. Also, I'm glad you brought that up too. Again, from my understanding, Professor Zhang is not a professor. So if you're one of those people who is interested or likes Professor Zhang's presentations, you'd probably really like watching a college course or a college lecture
Yeah.
or like an actual professor who's well educated and deeply knowledgeable about a topic lecture about it. You'd probably find it
Yeah.
really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that you know, I would say I agree. I don't think that he's a professor. From all the research that I've done, I can't find any evidence of him working for a university. I'm pretty sure right now he works for a high school.
Yeah.
And the professor is just like a nickname. I know that he has, I think, a degree from Yale, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah. English. I think it's an
Um,
English degree,
yeah, English
literature
degree from
maybe.
Yale.
Hmm.
But I've never seen any evidence of him actually like teaching in a professor position for a university. But he definitely styles his class like a college lecture, which is standing in front of the board,
Yeah.
writing on it, just talking at the class for an hour and a half.
Yep.
Um, but he kind of gives that aesthetic of professionalism and of a college history class without providing any of the substance of it.
Right. Right. The last thing I want to ask you, okay, now there's a clip I'm either showed or am going to show where Professor Zhang is asked, is he brainwashing the students? He says other teachers, schools to brainwash you. And the student says, are you brainwashing us? And he says, you know, no, you could, this is a pass fail class. You don't have to, I don't care what you do. You could walk out, okay? And he passes himself off as like not a brainwashing person. What do you think on the topic? Is it possible he's brainwashing people or like colloquially brainwashing people? Is he influencing people in a negative way? How do you see that discussion going?
From what I've seen of his presence on the internet, I definitely think he's at the very least influencing people in a negative way. And I think that, like I'm not gonna go, I'm not saying that he's gonna like MK Ultra brainwash them, but
Yeah.
at the same time, like we said before, like being an educator and being in that position is a really like important role and can be an extremely influential role in a young person's life. And whether or not you're attempting to influence them or not, if you're talking at them for an hour and a half, 3 times a week from the perspective of like an authority figure, you're gonna have an effect on the things that they think and the ways that they think. And especially from the way that he runs his class, he doesn't seem to enjoy when people push back on the things that he has to say. So for someone who claims to not be wanting to control how people thinks, he doesn't seem to like it very much when people walk away from his lecture with a different idea than he has.
Right. Yeah. That's what it comes across. I get that too. Yeah. Okay. Well, honestly, thank you so much for checking in with me and talking to me about this. We're kind of raging at Jiang together. So thank you for
Thank you for having
joining
me.
me in this. And I hope others find it interesting. Thank you so much, Corey.
Thank you.
Now, as I said before, Jiang also misrepresents modern politics. Many of his political takes are just horribly brain dead. Now, Jiang himself will admit he became popular basically after his prediction that Trump would go to war with Iran a few years before it happened. And just to be clear, the event that had everyone screaming he's a genius was the Midnight Hammer event, bombing raid that Trump did on Iranian nuclear facilities towards the end of June. Again, it wasn't a full war, and I mean, there's so much more to say about that event, but we'll just leave it right there. Because of that bombing, Jiang was seen as some sort of prophetic game theory genius. What's hilarious though is that if you actually watch the video where he made this prediction, he made a lot of other wrong predictions. He boldly claimed that Nikki Haley would be Trump's VP, and he said the war in Iran would be a boots on the ground military operation, not just the simple bombing that happened. Now, also, let me be very clear. As of this video right now, America has not fully gone to war with Iran, but I could 100% see it happening. I could 100% see Trump involving military action, boots on the ground with Iran as soon as tomorrow. I would not be shocked. But I just want to be clear. Jiang was regarded as a game theory predictive genius for only the event of the bombing, not the boots on the ground that might be happening soon. Anyways, honestly though, this prediction about America going to, or specifically Trump going to war against Iran is really not surprising at all, especially considering Trump's deep relationship with Netanyahu and Israel. What's interesting though is that Jiang does not think Trump and Netanyahu are even friends.
And so, I mean, if you are just watching what's happening, you don't think that Netanyahu and Trump are friends. In fact, you think that they actually hate each other.
Why though? Why does he think this? Isn't it obvious that Trump and Netanyahu are besties? Let's take a look at the evidence. First of all, Netanyahu was the first foreign leader to visit Trump in the White House after he became president for the second time. Trump posted weird AI videos of turning Gaza into some resort city, and one of the images was Trump and Netanyahu hanging out at the beach in Gaza, just chilling, drinking some drinks. Trump literally allied with Israel and Netanyahu to go to war and bomb Iran. Then Netanyahu gave a speech essentially thanking and giving Trump high praise after the bombing.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace.
Trump posted an insane post on Truth Social, essentially calling Netanyahu some sort of war hero and defending him against any crimes that he committed or crimes that he was being prosecuted for in Israel, calling them a witch hunt. Netanyahu responded on Twitter or X or whatever, saying, "Thank you, Donald Trump. Together we will make Middle East great again." And most recently, Israel just agreed to join Trump's Board of Peace, which is an absolute scam. And Netanyahu is going to have a privileged position on that board. Well, what I think is happening is an example of audience capture. In many of his recent videos, Jiang has created himself a really interesting position in the political landscape. Let me explain. As I've talked about, Jiang is very against Judaism and often implies that Jewish-affiliated elites are in power over society. He also heavily demonizes AIPAC and says much of the government is ran and controlled by Israel. Going along with this, as you can probably guess, he is very much against the genocide in Gaza, which everyone should be, right? Because of all of his anti-Israel, anti-AIPAC, anti-Zionist, and pro-Palestinian viewpoints, I think he has amassed a large following of left-wing supporters. But also because of his many viewpoints about conspiracies, religion, organized politics in schools, and other right-leaning opinions, he has amassed a large following of right-wing supporters. I think because of all of this, Jiang is incredibly soft on Trump and refuses to admit that Trump and Netanyahu are verifiably best friends, because it would essentially break the combination of his worldviews. If he was so against Israel and genocide, he would have to disavow and disrespect Trump as president, but he doesn't. Let's look at some examples.
Why do people on the right love him? Why does MAGA love him? Because that's right. Because he is an outsider. He's the enemy of the elites. Because the elites hate him, okay? Why won't they do that? Like, why won't they become friends with Donald Trump? And you know, it's something that Donald Trump probably wants as well, right? Yeah, it's hatred, okay? Do you understand? It's pure hatred. I want to kill this guy. Okay, do you understand? So you can see, like, the hatred between left and right. This is what we call TDS, or Trump derangement syndrome. The inability to recognize who Donald Trump is, and the inability to think properly about how to deal with Donald Trump, okay? Donald Trump, ever since he became elected president, the left, the elite, has been trying to persecute him, right? Remember that when he became president, the media was spreading stories that Trump was a Russian agent. He was a spy of Putin. That's just nonsense. There's no evidence of that, but people believe that, okay? Then they were trying to say, then they tried to use the justice system against Donald Trump, right? They impeached him twice. They raided his house, okay? They're trying to send him to prison. A judge in Colorado tried to remove Donald Trump from the ballot, meaning you couldn't vote for him. So everything that the elite has done has been to destroy Donald Trump. Not only are the elite trying as hard as they can to destroy Donald Trump, but at the same time, they're destroying the institutions and the narratives that hold America together, okay? Ever since Donald Trump became president, the mainstream media, New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, have relentlessly attacked him, therefore destroying their credibility, okay? Therefore destroying liberalism. It's the elites themselves who have destroyed the narratives and the institutions that bind America together, and it's all because of the hatred of Donald Trump. Okay? Does that make sense? So it's really going to be this hatred of Donald Trump that drives the Second American Civil War, okay?
Not once in this entire man-child rant from Jiang does he put any responsibility on Trump or any blame on Trump's horrible actions as president. Instead, he places all of the blame on the quote-unquote elites and the left and says they will be the reason for causing the Civil War. He also repeats tons of Trump's own talking points about the Russia hoax and the section about TDS. And lastly, let's just be clear. Trump is an elite. He has always been an elite. Just look at the Epstein files. Look at his entire life. So for Jiang to deny this is actually just really weird and embarrassing and shows his insane bias.
To be a great leader in the world, in history, you need 3 skills. And if you just analyze what the leaders of today are like, it will make sense to you, okay? So Putin, Trump, every leader in the world shares these 3 skills. The first is unpredictability. People cannot predict how you will behave. Second skill is high stress tolerance. So Donald Trump is probably the most hated man in America. He goes to bed and he sleeps like a baby.
Even though this is a short clip, there's so much wrong with it. It's wild. First of all, using Putin as Trump as somehow examples of great leaders is completely ridiculous. The criteria he chose for quote unquote great leaders is really in itself just dumb. Being unpredictable and having thick skin. And then lastly, both of these items do not even apply to Trump himself. Trump is incredibly predictable in the idiotic ways he operates as president. And then lastly, Trump does not sleep at night. Anyone paying attention knows this. He's up at all hours tweeting the most thin-skinned, whining tweets, responding to some of the most basic of criticisms and ridicules from celebrities, social media, major events in America, from news sources, from journalists. So again, none of these apply to Trump. And listen, while we're on the topic of Putin, I do just want to highlight the fact that Jiang constantly acts as a mouthpiece for Russian and Putin propaganda. Okay, he misrepresents Russia and Putin as being in a positive light in all the interactions in their invasion in Ukraine. He demonizes and talks trash about Ukraine, their efforts, and NATO. I just want to show one clip to show this, but I could add 20 or 30 minutes to this video talking about how Jiang misrepresents the war, the invasion of Ukraine.
So I think the war is lost. If you just look at the situation on the front lines, the morale among Russian soldiers is extremely high. They've mastered drone warfare to an extent that no other nation can emulate. There's massive desertions among the Ukrainians. So the war is lost. But at the same time, if you just look at historical patterns, historical analogies, what you will understand is it's at this time that NATO will have no choice but to double down. NATO is going to have to come into the war. Why? Because they cannot accept the fact that they've lost. They can't go to the public and say, oh, you know, we spent $hundreds of billions in Ukraine. We've lost a lot of weaponry. 4 years, Putin was offering peace all this time. And we said no. And oops, we made a mistake. Sorry. They can't do that.
4 years and Putin was offering all this peace all this time. Now, if that framing of the situation doesn't reveal how much of a political dunce Jiang is, then I don't know what does. What I think is most telling, though, is when in an interview, Jiang is asked about the Epstein files, and Jiang himself defends Donald Trump being in the Epstein files. Can we be clear about that? Jiang does not think anyone has any dirt on Trump. Really?
And also, like, as I keep on saying, there's absolutely no blackmail on this guy, because a guy like Donald Trump, he has been breaking a law in his entire life and getting away with it. So he knows how to skirt the law. He knows how to not get in trouble with the law. And he knows how to be careful about someone like Jeffrey Epstein, who cannot keep his mouth shut, okay? So I don't think there's any dirt on this guy. I'd be very surprised if the Epstein files implicate Trump in any manner.
From one of Jiang's most recent interviews with Sneeko, he presents a brand new idea about the Epstein files, where he says that the Epstein file release is a false flag meant to convince parents that they should put microchips in their child's bloodstream.
But the entire point is to traumatize the population so that they'll be much more amenable to state authority, right? So how can we prevent Epstein from emerging again? Well, let's microchip our children, right? If you put a microchip in your kid, in his bloodstream, you'll never be afraid of your fear of your child going missing. And so if you make that, the omnipresent issue, if this is all that people think about, then you make it much more easier for people to accept the idea of microchipping their children.
Okay,
right?
just like 9/11 was used for the Patriot
Exactly.
Act and mass surveillance. So you think that the Epstein files released now is to traumatize people to spread what Palantir wants, what Peter Thiel wants with, mass surveillance.
Remember, Epstein hated Trump because Trump was a threat to the old world order that he ran.
While I'm no historian or political theorist, I am an extremely passionate educator. I care deeply about teachers and our education system, and I do agree that yes, it is not the best, and I have my own ways on how we should fix schools in America. Jiang, to his credit, feels similarly. Sadly though, in many of his videos, you guessed it, he often misrepresents education and misrepresents the role in society that organized schools can and should play. Here's our first example.
But I'm going to tell you the 3 societies that first introduced mandatory free public schooling in the world, okay? The first is called Sparta. Sparta was a small city-state in Greece. They had a new system in which children as early as 5 or 6 years old, they were put into a school. The second society was called the Aztecs. And the third society is called Prussia. And actually, Prussia is a system that everyone uses today. What is common about all 3 societies? Sparta, Aztecs, and Prussia. What is common to all 3? War. All 3 societies are fundamentally war societies, dedicated to defeating their neighbors. Okay, do you understand this? Why we have schools is because schools are really good at preparing people for war.
So real quick, the mandatory schooling in Sparta was literally a military school. So again, a little bit misleading, but at the end of the day, Jiang's trying to kind of create some sort of causation between being good at war and having organized school, as if the government just uses school as a tool to brainwash and prepare students for war, control them, manipulate them, whatever. Also, think about all the societies and cultures that were amazing at war, but didn't necessarily have organized mandatory schooling. This is just your run-of-the-mill correlation causation fallacy. And the funny thing is that Jiang does teach this to his students, but he just can't seem to grasp the concept himself.
It's really important to understand that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. Okay?
Jiang also likes to go on many rants about how school separates students from the divine.
First of all, we're all connected to the vine, but we just choose to forget we're connected to the vine. Okay? Why? Because society, mass society, needs you to be obedient, needs you to be a machine, needs you to work to be obedient. Okay? So the entire point of school is to separate you from the divine. Why? Because at an early age, you're removed from your parents. So why are kids so miserable? And the answer is that when you're born, you have an automatic connection with the divine. Okay? So, and as you lose this connection, you grow more and more confused, which leads to anxiety and doubt. And over time, if this confusion is not addressed properly, then it will lead to depression. Okay?
Now, as a whole, ideas and mindsets like these are often extremely enticing to a disgruntled populace of frustrated school learners. Rather than reflect on the many variables that cause a person to not enjoy school, it's easy to demonize education, teachers, and society as simply trying to brainwash you.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Let's just say you're a mother or father. And you have a child, right? What's the worst thing that could happen in your life? Your child is taken away from you, right? What does school do? School is designed to take your child away from you. Okay, it's about brainwashing, right? Because how do you brainwash someone? If you're with your parent, are you going to be brainwashed? No. Because you feel loved, you feel secure. Your parents are going to protect you. You're going to ask your parent, hey, is this teacher, is he or she lying to me? And the parent's like, yeah, he's lying to you, okay? What happens if you leave your parents? How do you feel? Insecure. You're anxious. You're afraid. So who do you trust? Your teacher. Whatever your teacher says is now correct. What I'm saying is, when a parent is with a child, the child feels secure. And if you're secure, you're much more willing to disobey authority. You're much willing to ask questions. But if you take the parent away, you can't do that. You must now rely on the teacher, who can now brainwash you.
You know, it honestly really saddens me to say this, but in all my years of teaching, I've met a lot of students, a lot of families where the home life is not good at all. And school, rather than be some weird brainwashing place is really an amazing outlet for these children, okay? And again, Jiang is just pushing an incredibly biased viewpoint, almost detached from reality. And let's also say, I have seen families, I have seen parents literally brainwash their children to believe and think certain ways. So let's not pretend that only schools are brainwashing children.
So are you brainwashing us?
Am I brainwashing you? Okay, so the question is, am I brainwashing you? Okay, that's a good question, and it's a fair question. And again, that's why I tell you this, okay? You have the capacity to ask me questions. You have the capacity to challenge me. You have the capacity to think for yourself. So all I'm saying is, hear me out, ask me questions, and then think for yourself whether or not I make sense. Because the difference between my class and other classes is like, I don't test you, right? I don't give you grades. It's a pass-fail class. You can actually choose to say, you know what, this is nonsense. I don't want to listen anymore. I can't stop you. But in school, guess what happens if you don't come to school? Your parents get arrested.
I would argue school is the opposite of brainwashing, and we need to be much better with how we use that term. State standards and lessons in America heavily reflect the desire to help students become critical thinkers in a democratic society. In all of my schools, in all of my grade levels, in all of my English classes alone, I have taught numerous lessons with the goal to help students avoid being brainwashed. Discussions about propaganda, persuasion tactics, arguments and counter-arguments, source assessment and understanding reliable sources, logical fallacies, and debate tactics. These lessons all seem to go against Jiang's main claims, and the fact that he doesn't realize this as a teacher himself really causes me to question his morals, ethics, and experience as a teacher. In history class alone, students are taught about events where governments and societies attempted to brainwash and mislead their people. There are even numerous lessons about how America attempted to brainwash and mislead their populace, especially during the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, the women's suffrage movement, prohibition, and even McCarthyism. So anyways, yeah, Jiang is just dead wrong. My last section of this video, and potentially the most frustrating, is that Jiang is a super spreader, if you will, of conspiracy theories. I mean, in this one video alone, he agrees with and helps push the leading conspiracy theories about the faking of the moon landing, Bush doing 9/11, and the conspiracies about the assassination of JFK.
This is official NASA footage, live from the moon. And this is the best part, okay? The best part is when they return from the moon back to Earth. You see how easy it is? It's just like they just fly up. No resistance at all, okay? Perfect. Humanity's greatest achievement. So a reporter is asking him, Mr. President, do you know that America is being attacked right now? And he's like, we'll talk about it later. He's not worried. At this point, no one knows who's attacking America. No one knows how large the attack is. As President of the United States, he should be rushed immediately to a safe location. And he's not worried. He's like, we'll talk about it later. Very, very strange, okay? And that's why, even today, people are suspicious about what happened. And there were a lot of witnesses who believe that there were other shooters as well, at least one more shooter. And they heard the shot from other places. Many of these witnesses, almost 30 of them, were all killed or they died mysteriously soon afterwards. That's very strange. Guess what, guys? A lot of famous athletes wear number 33. And they are Freemasons, okay? So this is Scottie Pippen and Shaquille O'Neal. We know they are Freemasons. Larry Bird and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar also wear number 33. Okay? 33 is important. Jesus died when he was 33 years old. The word God, Elohim, appears 33 times in Genesis. King David reigned for 33 years.
Now, I both can and can't believe that Jiang starts going into numerology at the end of this video and starts accusing NBA basketball players for simply wearing the number 33. Anyways, at the end of the video, he did get a flag from YouTube about misinformation related to 9/11. And of course, Jiang takes this opportunity to attempt to grift a little bit by directing people towards his Substack and a website to give him a small donation. And if you thought numerology was bad, again from the recent Sneeko interview, Jiang starts legitimizing and pushing the bottom of the barrel in terms of conspiracy theories, Pizzagate, and even says, yes, even Obama is implicated in Pizzagate. I wish I was joking.
They want to go after John Podesta, who really is the power broker behind the Democratic Party. And he is, I mean, like, you go back to Pizzagate, okay? Right? The Podesta emails that was released by WikiLeaks. I mean, like, he's heavily implicated. But then, you know, basically everyone in the Democratic Party, including Barack Obama, is also implicated in Pizzagate as well. You have Hollywood that's heavily implicated in Pizzagate, in pedophilia.
Jiang also has a deep hatred and I would say fear of the secret special elites that run our society. He really has a laundry list of conspiracies that all come back and relate to the elites and how they're trying to run and destroy our world.
The red are those who practice cannibalism during funerals. The blue are just those who just bury the body and don't practice cannibalism. So what you're not taught is, among the elite, this sort of stuff goes on a lot. So this is 19th century in Victorian Britain. And this is, you know, the British Empire. And guess what, guys? What they like to do is they like to steal mummies from Egypt and eat these mummies. We don't do this crap anymore, right? Unfortunately, this is Albert Einstein's brain. Albert Einstein, before he died, said, please, whatever you do not dissect my brain, okay? I know. So of course, a doctor steals his brain and cuts it into different pieces, okay? Now, let me ask you this question. Let's just say this doctor were to take this brain and make some medicine out of it, okay? He takes his brain and cuts up into like 100 different parts. And then he takes this medicine and he sells it to rich people for $1 million. Could he find 100 rich people who would pay $1 million to eat Einstein's brain? Yes, okay? So as I keep on telling you, the rich are insane. If you want to know what secret societies do, well, yeah. This and this, okay? And again, this is only a small group of people. But now we know why these people control the world. Because they're able to keep secrets. Because they're more motivated than everyone else. And they're able to work together in a way that allows them to achieve ultimate power. These leaders you see, right? These leaders you see, they are puppets. They are just the face. The real power are these secret societies that practice these rituals.
Anyways, listen. While I think his viewpoints on conspiracies and his pushing of conspiracy theories is most frustrating, I also want to give it the least amount of talking space. I am just so tired of the constant online culture and society, especially in America, completely obsessed with conspiracy theories. Oftentimes the evidence for these conspiracies are extremely lacking, and conspiracy theorists often completely deny clear and specific evidence that refutes their main claims. Again, I'm just tired of conspiracy theories. I'm tired of people falling for them. And I'm tired of dangerous people like Jiang that continues to prop them up for views and for entertainment. Well, there you have it. Not only do all these factors combine to make Professor Jiang a horrible teacher, but I think they also make him a really dangerous communicator. And this gets to the heart of why he has so many followers. With all these information charlatans, they spread lies by speaking confidently and decisive on really complex topics. With Jiang, not only does he do this in all of his videos and in all of his interviews, But he does this by hiding behind the facade of being a respectable and respectful teacher figure. One that cannot brainwash you, and one that gives you the special information that others don't want you to know. I would argue that these are sometimes the most dangerous type of charlatans. Not the type that are clearly crazy, that use incredibly wild, heated, and divisive language, maybe like an Alex Jones. Instead, the ones that present themselves as calm, clear educators. These types make it especially difficult to identify their faults, their lies, and their uses of misinformation and disinformation. They often bolster their misinformation by offering up some real nuggets of truth, or seemingly reasonable sounding opinions. Overall though, just like with all the other little dung beetle charlatans, Professor Jiang is just pushing his own brand of bullshit around the room. And you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to Jiang himself.
Also, I'll give you another example, the way I teach. Now, when you see me teach, you think, oh, you must have a script. You must have outlined the class. I don't do that. I have a conception, I have a framework in my head. I come to class and I teach. How do I teach? I watch your observations, I watch your facial expressions, and based on your responses, I then start to flesh out the framework. And how do I do that? Because I'm always accessing a higher force, and I'm receiving this information that I can then articulate to you in class.
Hey, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos about education. Have a good one. Bye.